Dynasty rosters never sleep. Tonight, we're diving into some uncertain situations to find comfort within discomfort. Let's get it. Pulling apart the fantasy football fabric one thread at a time. This is Unravelled. I am Trav, hosting and West Coasting as usual. We're posted up on the Undroppables YouTube channel, of course. Make sure you give it a subscribe, like, leave us a comment. That really, really goes a long way. Love seeing that subscriber count up. Love seeing the comments on the videos. Having fun putting out this content for all of you. With me tonight, not the freak in the spreadsheets, Mr. Daniel J. Wisner. Tonight, I am joined by another West Coaster, a featured Dynasty writer over at the undroppables.com. Great website. You should go check it out. He is the processor of processes and the lead general of the Roman Wilson Empire. Find him on x.com at dynasty_Joe FF. He is the Greek Adonis of fantasy, Mr. Joe Kuvatakis. How are you doing tonight, brother?
Oh man, I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for having me, Trav. And yeah, I am not the freak in the spreadsheets. Does that make me the lady in the streets around here?
No, I just called you the Greek Adonis of fantasy football, buddy. That's you.
Well, oh man, I love it. Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here. The title of this show is appropriate, especially tonight, because we are unraveling a lot with this show sheet. I'm very excited to dive into it with you.
Dude, honestly, like, it's a bit of an ugly one to unpack, but I think this is the show to do it because we like to get into these situations and tell you what you can do in the midst of uncertainty. So yeah, I said in the pre-open, Joe, that we're going to find some comfort within discomfort tonight. We're going to take 4 teams whose offenses are borderlining on nightmarish to decipher, and we are going to unravel them and tell you who you should target and who you might want to stay away from. Before we get into that, Joe, I just want to give a big thanks to everybody for purchasing the UN score, our wide receiver prospect model over at the undroppables.com. Business has been booming right off the hop. We've had really good reception, lots of purchases, lots of discussion in the Discord. So make sure you go sign up for the Patreon to get in on that as well. And it seems like everybody's loving the prospect score that we put out. Shared it with some industry friends as well and got some really good feedback on things that we might want to consider at a later date. So yeah, it's just been really fun. And I think that's a big milestone for the Undroppables brand. Like, sometimes I don't think we gave ourselves enough of a pat on the back for that, because that is a legit, beautiful publication that is a wicked tool for people in their fantasy football tool belt. So go check it out on the site, undroppables.com. $20 gets you the draft classes from 2018 all the way through to 2024. Prospect scores for all of them, player comps for all of them. Really, really good stuff. Joe, Wiz and I have been waxing for a few weeks on the UN score, of course. You haven't been on for a few weeks, although this is not your first appearance on the Unraveled Fantasy Football program. But why don't you tell us what you think, as maybe somebody who hasn't been on the show for a few weeks, what you've been doing with the UN score, maybe how you've applied it, what your thoughts are on the look and feel of the document in itself. What do you think, man?
Yeah, well, I'll take the last part first, just the look and feel. I mean, Dukes did an incredible job. I love the overlay. I love the, sort of coder theme to the whole thing. So I think it's the slickest looking model and prospect score document I've ever seen. But more importantly than that, the content is fantastic. So I've heard you guys talk about it as a tool in the tool belt. I think that's exactly right. Obviously, we can't base everything on these scores. And my big critique of models over the years has been just the context that they lack. So I like to dive deep into each of these prospects, kind of know their stories. But I think that the way the model is constructed and what it puts weight on versus what it doesn't put weight on actually is a huge advantage and differentiator from the rest of these models. And so, as telling as the top end of the model is, it's also really helpful when you look at some of the names down low. And I'm big on, you've read a lot of my work processing the process. A lot of my work is just ruling out the guys we don't want and understanding why we don't want them. And I think that the model just does that intuitively. And I actually, my favorite low key feature is looking back at previous years. And we're going to talk about a couple of those guys tonight, actually. But looking back at previous years and seeing how well it performed, I mean, this thing runs pure. So it's, kudos to the team, to Wiz and to Jay and to Chalk and to Jax and, of course, Dukes, who did a phenomenal job. So I love it. Couldn't recommend it more highly. I look at all these models, and ours is, I think, the best I've seen.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, I know you get deep in the weeds, Joe. That's why I wanted to have you on again in Wiz's absence. I know that you are a very sharp fantasy gamer. We were in a rookie draft with each other just this past week. Maybe a little bit of wheeling and dealing happening, maybe a little bit of wheeling and dealing not happening as well, Joe, with some of those dumpy ass quarterbacks you were trying to sell off to me so you could get some roster spots for the rookies off the waivers, Joe. I know what you were doing, Joe. I know what you were doing.
Tale as old as time. Tale as old as time.
Yeah.
We got another
Yeah,
one coming up
me.
in like a week and a half too. So, we are not
Yeah.
done. We are in the midst of rookie draft season still, and I love it.
Tis the season, man. And best ball season is underway. Go sign up at Underdog Fantasy, of course, with our promo code Undroppables, up to $250 deposit match on your first deposit. And I believe last I checked, there was a little bonus pick happening when you sign up and use our promo code. So good stuff happening there. I'm in a ton of best ball drafts. Going to go into a couple of potentially high stakes Dynasty startups coming up in the next month or so. So we're fired up for that, Joe. We are fired up. But tonight, we're going to dive into a little bit of the minutia for some teams who are very hard to unpack. There's a lot of the Chiefs, a team you want to attach to. The Rams, a team you want to attach to. Bunch of offenses. You just want to take pieces, probably at cost. Obviously, you're setting expectations for some of those lower guys. They might need some breaks, but they are in an offense where they get opportunity, and we want them on our fantasy rosters. Some of these teams, at face value, we might not want very many of their assets on our fantasy rosters if we don't dig a little bit deeper. But that's what Joe and I are going to do tonight. Joe, we're going to start in Nashville, Music City, with the Tennessee Titans. And we're going to start with, I think, the biggest elephant in the room, Mr. Will Levis. He had some really nice upgrades around him. They brought in some offensive line help in the draft. A buttload of receivers came in. They still got Chigo Okonkwo, so that's something. And of course, they brought in Tony Pollard to go along with Tyjae Spears. So what they're building around Will Levis is really nice, along with that new coaching staff coming in with Brian Callahan as the head coach. Nick Holtz is the offensive coordinator, and Brian's dad, Bill. I always call Brian Bill just because I started watching football when Bill Callahan was the coach of your Raiders, Joe. That's when I got deep into Madden. And so when I see Callahan and B, it's always Bill, but father and son duo in there. So let's start on Will Levis here. He feels like very ultimate high risk, high reward. We know that he's going to get playing time, so that's a positive for a quarterback that's young like him, who didn't necessarily get all that draft capital. But now it's just on him as to whether he can succeed. So I want to know from you, Joe, what kind of quarterback do you think is he in the fantasy landscape? And what do you think maybe his ceiling might be in 2024?
Well, I'm really intrigued by Will Levis's prospects in 2024 with Brian Callahan coming over and bringing presumably the Bengals style offense to Tennessee. I think that the biggest and most obvious lowest hanging fruit is just the passing volume, right? So Tennessee threw the ball 494 times last season. The Bengals last season, with Burrow missing, 8 games and Browning as their quarterback, still threw the ball 615 times. So, and I think that would have been higher had Burrow been around. So just off the bat, you can expect, I'd say minimum, a 25% increase in pass attempts. So that alone raises the floor, raises the potential for big plays, raises the potential for touchdowns. Not to mention they got rid of Derrick Henry, so they're probably going to be a little less reliant on the running game. So just the volume increase alone, I think we should see a pretty good floor from Will Levis. It's definitely a make or break year for him because they've put this cast of characters around him. It's huge upgrades everywhere. it's sink or swim. And if he can't swim in this environment, they're probably going to be looking to add a quarterback in next year's draft. So there's the inherent risk that you might be looking at a 1-year, rental. And if he fails, you probably got a backup and are looking for a quarterback next year. So that's the risk. But I'm pretty excited about it. I mean, adding Calvin Ridley to DeAndre Hopkins, then bringing in Boyd to fill the slot, who already knows the system.
Yeah.
And then it doesn't stop there. There's easy dump offs to Tony Pollard, to Tajay Spears. Not to mention, they picked up one of my favorite undrafted rookie free agents, Dylan Johnson, who before his time in Washington, had an excellent receiving profile out of the backfield as well. So they've got 3 running backs who can catch passes and Chig. So it's a really good cast.
Yeah, I think they did pretty well bringing. I think none of the people they brought in are kind of blowing the doors off necessarily, but I think the collection of talent around him is light years better than what he had last season. And love what you said about that additional passing volume there too, because I think along with that is going to come a lot more wide receivers being on the field. Right, the Bengals are one of those teams that runs 11 personnel at one of the highest rates in the league. And so if we see that coming in, we know a lot of these receivers are going to get on the field. And I think Levis has a little bit of, I think he falls somewhere on the gunslinger scale. You know what I mean, Joe,
Totally,
where he's going to throw those YOLO balls up. And I think if some of those receivers can go up and get that stuff, we know that Nuke Hopkins can do some of that jump ball stuff. I'm not sure how I feel about Calvin Ridley, but we will get there on the deep downfield outside receiver spectrum necessarily. But I like that on Will Levis. And I've been finding that I've been taking shots on him a little bit, just because if we look at Dynasty startup ADP, he's the quarterback 24 in that neighborhood right now. And I think for a young quarterback with obviously the infusion of super flex leagues in our lives, I think he is an incredible value, because he's a guy who we already saw can put up week winning numbers as a quarterback, because he's going to be chucking it up there. And so I think he can do some of that this year. And so I'm definitely taking some shots, or maybe one of those teams where I'm going to stream quarterbacks and I go super, super late and I don't draft one in a 1 quarterback. I'm going to take a shot on Will Levis just for that upside.
Yeah, I think he's kind of in the on the Josh Allen spectrum in terms of quarterbacks, where he will run. He is a big, imposing dude, and he's strong. We didn't see it a ton last year, but I think he can, have that element to his game. But then also similar to Allen, he'll throw the ball a lot. He'll throw the ball deep. He'll throw some head scratchers. Early career Josh Allen. I'm certainly intrigued. I actually had him as, QB 25 in startups. And so I was thinking to myself, I view him as probably a mid-range QB2, and you can get him at basically QB3 prices. So there's some arbitrage just on market perception and folks thinking that he's not that good, 2nd round pick, what have you. He's going after guys like Drake May, who I'd put in the same phylum of player.
Totally.
He's going after Bryce Young, who failed a lot more miserably than Will Levis did last year. He's going after Bo Nix, who, landed really well, but is something of a check down artist. And, we haven't seen him play down to the NFL yet. So they did everything they could to help him succeed. So I don't know. I was kind of thinking, I have 1 share of Levis, and, I went into this exercise thinking, he's sort of a sell high on all the positives that they've put around him. And he's, if you can land an established vet, I'm okay with that. But I do think he's a floor play QB2 in redraft. And if he's valued as a QB3 in Dynasty, I actually think he's kind of a buy, albeit a high risk one, because like I said, you could be looking for a quarterback as soon as next season.
Yeah. That cannot be stated enough, that risk is massive with Levis. But if he hits with some of these guys, he's going to be one of the best values that we could find at the quarterback position all season long. So very, very well said, Joe. You mentioned those running backs, Tajay Spears and Tony Pollard. And this is a bit of a tricky one to decipher, right? There's a lot of overlap in skills between these 2 guys. Tony Pollard had an absolute shite season last year for Dallas on elite bell cow running back opportunity. Tajay Spears was one of those guys who did not get that elite bell cow opportunity, but absolutely made the most of what he did get playing behind Derrick Henry. So I think in both of these players, I think I like both of them in a vacuum to an extent, but together in the same backfield with that overlap of skill set and potential usage, Joe, is this running back room in a void? Is this one that you would be kind of shying away from? And if it's not, who would you say is the right guy to choose here?
No, I think that your instinct or the question is channeling the instinct of most fantasy and dynasty gamers, which is, it's complicated. I don't know who's going to be getting the work. These are the backfields I want to target, right? These
Yeah.
ambiguous backfields, they drive down the price on these guys.
Right.
And so when you drive their price down, like that's when I want to take shots. Right now, Pollard's ADP on Underdog, granted, I know we're talking Dynasty, but his ADP on Underdog is 90.
Yep.
Spears is 123. In startups, Pollard's ADP is 91 and Spears is at 101. So neither is overly expensive.
Yeah.
And the reason you want to go after these ambiguous backfields is because, one, we don't know who's going to be, the primary ball carrier or pass catcher. Two, there's the possibility of an injury. So there's upside, inherent upside in one guy running with the role, even if it's for a 5-week stretch. That could be the difference of you making the playoffs or not. And obviously, one guy can just seize the role. Tennessee's repeatedly said that they see these guys as interchangeable, and I believe that. And I think they both add value from a pass catching perspective as well. And this is what we're looking for in our running backs, right? So a team that wants to throw the ball to running backs and two guys that can catch the ball with asymmetrical upside based on where their price is. Those are the guys I want. I have a couple of shares of Tajay so far. I don't have any Pollard just yet, but I will be buying both at cost. And I'll be getting Dylan Johnson too, like I talked about earlier. But, with deference, I think, to Tajay because he is the cheaper of the two.
Yeah. I think we're in a very similar boat. Like I've definitely got a lot more Tajay than I do have of Tony Pollard. But I think it's interesting because I'm totally attacking Tajay with that 11th round pick, right? But I think if I had to lean towards one guy getting 1A duties, it's probably Tony Pollard. They brought in that contract. He's the 9th highest average per year running back right now. And I think with that overlap, like if they fully trusted Tajay Spears with that 3-down role, I don't know if they would have brought in a running back such as Tony Pollard. I think maybe they would have brought in someone that's maybe more change of pace, maybe another bigger body like a Derrick Henry style, but one that plays behind Tajay Spears, right? And so that's what gives me a little bit of pause on Tajay, but that price in the 11th round cannot be denied. My next note here, Joe, had those underdog ADPs. And so don't you hesitate to drop underdog ADPs because it's still best ball season. And if we want to drop those nuggets in there, we do what we want. We do what we want.
Well, not only that, I think underdog is the realest data out there right now too, right? These are real money leagues that are happening. And so like that data is a leading indicator for us in Dynasty, particularly at the running back position. We think more long-term about other positions, but running back is so season to season. I want to know what the underdog price is when I'm making Dynasty decisions, right? That's real-time data that we start collecting in February. Great.
Exactly. And sharp players too. And I think while underdog is reflective of the 2024 season, Dynasty rosters still have to play the 2024 season. And I don't know about you, Joe, but I like to win, right? I like to win now sometimes. And so we can do that by looking at some of that stuff. Yeah, I think that's all good takes there. And another concern, the only last final concern that I have is when we look at the Bengals offenses, I know that Joe Mixon is not the definition of an efficient running back by any means, but looking at some of Brian Callahan's Bengals offenses, they were not necessarily the most efficient on the ground. Joe Mixon was more of a get by on massive volume than he was kind of get by on a whole bunch of efficiency. Of course, he had a bunch of touchdowns and stuff as well. I think where some of these guys could make some of their bread is in the red zone, but just it all hinges on Will Levis again, right? Will Levis will be the deciding factor in whether they get into the end zone often or not. You know what I mean? And so TBD on that. But yeah, you can't deny that 11th round price for Spears. And in certain situations, maybe if I went a little bit light early in the draft, I might dip my toes into the Pollard cookie jar as well.
Totally.
I think we touched on probably one of the more interesting and difficult to decipher positions on this team. Well, maybe not super difficult, but difficult to see where we're going to glean a lot of production from. And that would be the wide receiver room. And my first question to you, Joe, is I think I have a bit of a thought on how this might shake out, but what do you think the role definition ends up looking like here as far as where these guys are playing and how they might be making their bread as far as in the passing game with Will Levis?
Yeah, this one's tough. I mean, talk about interchangeable pieces, right? We were just talking about that at the running back position. But if you look at the seasons that, Calvin Ridley and Nuck had last year, they were very similar in terms of total fantasy output, in terms of fantasy points per game, in terms of, yardage. So obviously, they were the wide receiver one on their then respective teams, and now they are teammates. But I don't think that there are enough, high quality target earners on this roster that is going to box either of them out from earning at least a 20% target share, which is what we want to see. Nuck was at something like 26% last year, so that may come down a little bit, but we already talked about the projected increase in passing volume. So you can offset a loss of efficiency or target dominance surely by adding more pass attempts. So I'm not really concerned about it. And frankly, I think they should be going pretty close to side by side. I mean, even their ADOTs were just about the same, right? Calvin Ridley was at 13.7. Hopkins was at 14.4. They're both sort of in that, 10 to 15 yard range that we want to see. So I don't know. It's hard to decide. Again, I think we're going to be in the same position as we were with the running backs, where I'll just take the cheaper option.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think from a dynasty perspective, like I probably wouldn't be investing in these guys too much. Obviously, we're not really excited about drafting Nuke Hopkins on a dynasty roster in a startup, of course. Calvin Ridley, maybe. I don't actually have his dynasty startup ADP on me right now, but I think he's 30 now. On his third team, had a year suspension in there. I personally think
Was a
he's
very old rookie as well.
Totally. And I think he's a little bit miscast as that outside kind of down the field receiver. I think and I've said this on the show before, I think the best way that he produces, and we saw a lot of this in his Atlanta days, is as a heavily targeted slot player who can kind of go over the middle and do a little bit of work there. So, but he showed pretty well last year in Jacksonville. So maybe I'm just an idiot. But I think he probably ends up playing outside with Hopkins. I think Tyler Boyd now has that slot role kind of locked down. I think he could be in line for in the neighborhood of 90 plus targets as well, with that team coming up in passing volume, the uncertainty of the target share that's going to go to those running backs. I think Tyler Boyd's kind of sneaky in the back of your best ball drafts right now for sure. I have a team where I have Hopkins and Ridley, wasn't able to get Levis, which hurt real bad. I was about 2 picks away from getting Levis, so I didn't get him, and now I got Tyler Boyd on the board in the 200 area, and I'm contemplating whether I should take him even in lieu of having the quarterback. But very interesting wide receiver room and cheap enough. And like a lot of these teams, actually, one of my themes as I was going through this, Joe, is I love a lot of them for best ball more so than dynasty, because they create cheaper stacking opportunities, and you don't have to be investing in the Patrick Mahomes type stack where you're taking probably a quarterback and a tight end within your first 5 rounds, which puts you at a bit of a disadvantage there. So yeah, this is an interesting team, much more for best ball for me. If I'm going anywhere in dynasty, okay, yeah, I might take a shot on Calvin Ridley, but I'd probably prefer to stay away. But speaking of dynasty, Joe, we talk a lot about guys who we still have a candle lit for on the Unravelled fantasy football program. I don't know if you know where I'm going with this, Joe.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
Would you say there is any flicker left for one Treylon Burks?
I mean,
Tennessee?
it is
pretty glowing comments from Callahan over the last week or so.
I mean, if it's flickering, I don't know. It's somewhere. What's the level below flickering? Right? It's like just
it's an
out.
ember. It's
yeah,
an ember.
yeah, exactly. It's out. The ember's burning. There's like a little bit of wind, so maybe it could pick back up. But boy, that one hurt. I had Treylon Burks in a Debbie league, and I was excited about him for years. And then he had the rough rookie year, and I was like, okay, he was injured. He had that big concussion, and then just last year, nothing. They added Nook in the offseason last year, so that kind of started to kill my hope. And then this year, you go and add Ridley. Then just to really just stamp it out, they go and add Tyler Boyd as well. So, oh man, I have one share of him left, and I can't sell it. So I don't know
Nope.
what to do with him. I'm very sad. I guess we're going to keep the candle burning because we don't have a choice. There's no buyers. It's,
Yeah.
we cash in or, we send them to the wire and give up on the opportunity cost.
Yeah, totally. Like you basically are just gonna have to cut bait on that at some point, but it is what it is, I guess. I got a couple shares
A
left just
trade,
to make sure.
maybe if he gets traded to another team,
That
that's
would be the
probably
ticket. Dude, like I would say that the Ember had a little bit of flame on it before the Tyler Boyd signing too, right? Because you see Burks and we love him after the catch. He's big boy. Let him do some work out of the slot with those other two guys operating on the outside, but dagger to the heart by way
yeah,
of Tyler Boyd. So
yeah.
yeah, it's just, you're gonna have to cut bait on that first round wide receiver much earlier than you thought you were gonna have to, and just pick up the pieces. Pick up the pieces for your dynasty rosters. Okay, Joe. The next team, while still very difficult to decipher, I think is a lot more fun. Maybe not as fun to decipher because it's really hard to figure out what the hell you want to do with certain positions on this team. But we're going to talk about the Green Bay Packers. They are so young. It is absolutely insane on this team. Like Jordan Love, still on his rookie deal. All of those wide receivers that they had last year were at least or nobody was past their third season, I believe. And that would be Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Dobbs, Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, a little bit of Bo Melton peppered in there if you so fancy, Joe. So the passing game we really like. Well, there's a lot of options, and we will talk about those tight ends. But I think the running back room, was kind of the big news over the offseason, obviously, with so many options at wide receiver. This team retooled at the running back position. They got rid of stalwart Aaron Jones. They brought back AJ Dillon, funny enough, but they also brought in one Josh Jacobs from your Raiders, Joe. And then in the third round of the draft, they went out and got themselves a nice little Marshawn Lloyd action, who I think is definitely a factor in this backfield as early as halfway through this season. So I want to know, like, how did Marshawn Lloyd's addition move the needle for you on Josh Jacobs? Did it really move it that much, or do you think the upside is still great for Josh Jacobs, or do you think Marshawn's going to have something to say about this backfield touch split?
Sure. We'll start with Josh Jacobs. I've been watching this guy his entire career, even at Alabama. So I'm very familiar with this game. I was pumped when the Raiders got him. It was kind of an up and down career with the Raiders. Phenomenal rookie year, then a lull, then a big fourth season, huge fourth season. Then they tagged him. So I've kind of seen it all with him, and there are certain environments which he thrives and certain ones that he does not. I'm kind of wondering if the end isn't near because this guy didn't have athleticism to burn. What he does well, he's got great vision. He's really good at moving in tight areas and just shaking loose, right? And so last year we saw huge dips in a lot of numbers. I mean, his yards per carry was a career low, 3.5. Now, I hate that stat. I don't think it's a really indicative stat and doesn't tell us as much as it looks like it tells us. But that was on a 50-50 split between man and zone runs. And I bring that up because, Green Bay obviously runs a lot more zone concepts. And he fared slightly better in the zone concepts than in the man concepts, but not by much. He was 3 points per game below expected in terms of fantasy points. This is according to Player Profiler, he was at negative 40.5 expected points added. That's good for 142 in the league last season. Good is probably a generous term. Yeah. So he also had the number one stacked box rate, though. So you have to imagine with improved efficiency in Green Bay and a lighter box with all those receiving weapons that you mentioned, it's going to get a little bit better for him. The thing is, it's a really, really good scheme fit for Lloyd. I tend to believe he's eventually going to take the lion's share of the carry this season. And I think he's going to have a role right out the gate. They've more or less told us so. So we'll see how smooth or rocky that is for him early in the season. But as long as he doesn't land in the doghouse somehow, I think it's just an eventual takeover as the course of the season goes. Jacobs, they can get out of his contract after this year. I don't know. I think the writing's on the wall, and Josh Jacobs looks like he was a cover your A type of play for them. So with that being said, in Dynasty, it's really a season-long game with running backs anyways, as we already alluded to. So Jacobs takes a hit, but he should still be used and he should still be productive. I think out the gate, Lloyd is going to be the pass catcher, though. That's never been a strong suit from Josh Jacobs. We saw Lloyd do that a little bit in college. He didn't have a huge receiving season, but what we did see is at the Senior Bowl, when they were actually throwing him the ball, they were actually putting him out there at the end of the receiving drills. And they usually reserve these slots at the end for the best pass catching running backs. And they had him doing some one-on-one drills on the receiving side, and he was lighting it up. So I think he proved to the, NFL draft industrial complex that he actually can catch passes. And I think that's part of the story here as well, because there's a big void in running back targets with the departure of Aaron Jones. And so I think he can probably step right into that role. And he's also a very willing and fearless pass blocker as well. So I think he steps right into that role and then grows from there.
Nice. Yeah. And that's like 60 plus targets per that Aaron Jones has been getting from that team. So that's a nice little pie to be biting off there. And I think it's interesting, Joe, because you're sitting in the same spot as I am in saying that Marshawn Lloyd, probably midway to late in the season, has a significant role here, because a lot of people were saying that was a terrible landing spot for him. And I didn't necessarily get it, right? Because Josh Jacobs was always going to be no more than like a 2-year proposition for this team. We know that LaFleur has been trying to jam A.J. Dillon into this offense with no spit for years. A.J. Dillon averaged over 180 rush attempts the past 3 years and 35 targets in that span as well as the backup running back. So there is some pie to be had there. And so I think what it does, it didn't necessarily move the needle huge on Josh Jacobs. And maybe that's because my pre-existing expectations, I would say. I think what it does is it means we really want the Packers running back 2 now, where we did not want that with A.J. Dillon in the fold. So I think it's really interesting, because to me, it was kind of obvious that was going to happen with Marshawn Lloyd, because Josh Jacobs got the same contract that Aaron Jones was just coming off of. So it's not like they paid him more than Aaron Jones when they were still giving a second fiddle work behind Aaron Jones. It's not like Aaron Jones missed a bunch more time than Josh Jacobs either. In the last 4 years, Aaron Jones has only missed 3 games fewer than has Josh Jacobs. So it's not a significant bump there where you can say, oh yeah, but Aaron Jones was getting hurt a ton more, because he really wasn't. So I don't know. I think if we look at a split carry load, I think Josh Jacobs has really needed that 250 plus carries that he's had in Oakland/Las Vegas the last few years. And I'm curious to see what it looks like if he's down in that 200 carry range like Aaron Jones has been, because that's not a small dip in production. And I would venture to say that on less volume, Josh Jacobs is going to be much less efficient than Aaron Jones was. So I might be fading Josh Jacobs a little bit if we're looking at where he's going. I might just take a wide receiver at that point, you know what I mean, as opposed to trying to find another running back if I'm in the draft. But I'm super getting into Marshawn Lloyd after digging into this episode, buddy, because I think that's coming sooner rather than later for the Packers.
Yeah, I mean, if people are upset about a 3rd-round running back landing on an ascending young offense with a promising quarterback in a scheme fit that works perfectly and he can catch passes, I don't know what they want. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly what we're looking for. Oh, by the way, he runs like a 4.4 and he's 218 pounds. Like, what? How much better do you want it to get? Not every landing spot was the Chargers or the Cowboys, and the Cowboys didn't even give us a running back.
And the Chargers could be like an ugly trio after all of this hype too, right? Like it might just be a super gross, productive backfield in Los Angeles. So we're going to go into another extremely young position group, and we're going to save the wide receivers on this one for last too, because they are that's a spool of thread to unravel, let me tell you. We're going to talk about the tight ends first, though, because 2 rookies last season both gave us some reason for optimism, let's say, and that would be Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. Who do you prefer out of those 2 guys, Joe? Because Musgrave was getting fat snaps early in the season. Obviously, he went down, and Tucker Kraft came in and got even fatter snaps with some efficiency on top of it. So what's your stance on these tight ends, and who would you be drafting in a dynasty startup right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's an embarrassment of riches for Green Bay, right? I mean, they hit on every wide receiver they've taken lately. They take 2 tight ends last year, and it looks like they hit on both of them as well. I will say I'm a Musgrave truther. I think Kraft is as good of a handcuff as exists at the tight end position if you have benches deep enough to do that sort of thing, like we do often in Dynasty. I mean, excluding Isaiah Likely, I can't think of a backup tight end I'd rather have. But Musgrave's athleticism and namely his speed gives him the more appealing upside. Musgrave, you can tell it in their usage as well, right? Musgrave had a 7.2 A dot compared to 5 A dot for Kraft. Musgrave had a 19% target rate per route run compared to 16% for Kraft. Musgrave had more yards per route run than Kraft. Kraft had better yards, but I kind of think that was due to his low A dot, right? You're catching it closer to the line of scrimmage. You got a little bit more room to run. Musgrave had the higher yards per target over expected than did Kraft, if we want to get into, some of the more sophisticated analytics. But so every indication is that they view Musgrave as a weapon and Kraft as a good option. That's a great place to be.
Yeah. And I might play a little devil's advocate on that just for the additional efficiency that we did see from Kraft. But I'll be honest with you, Joe, I'm a big fan of Luke Musgrave as well. Like last season, I think it was early in the season, he came out of nowhere. You grabbed him off waivers, and there was one game where he had this massive seam touchdown or something. Like it was either on this or no, I think it might have been a post from the right side of the formation all the way across where he took it to the house for a touchdown. Instantly loved him. Instantly. I love this guy. He cost me nothing and he scored a fat touchdown. But then I was kind of surprised when I looked into some of the numbers at, maybe a little bit of the lack of efficiency. And sure, some of that can come with that increased A dot, right? Because those are harder targets to catch, let's say. But I kind of liked what Kraft offered as that yards after the catch guy. And what worries me a little bit about Musgrave is if they're using him as maybe a little bit more of a maybe intermediate / downfield tight end versus that lower A dot guy, what does that do to his volume? Having those outside receivers like a Wicks, like a Watson, like a Dobbs, right? I think those three guys eating up Musgrave's targets might be a little bit more detrimental than just Jaden Reed taking up some of the work that Tucker Kraft might get, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Totally. Although I think Jaden Reed is probably my favorite guy out of those wide receivers, and we'll get there. But I think to get that, we would need a Tucker Kraft takeover, right? Like if Tucker Kraft is the second fiddle, what Jaden Reed does or doesn't do doesn't matter for Kraft because he's not getting on the field enough to be that guy, right? But I really think there could be a takeover coming soon. If we look, like both of these guys were fine, right? Through the first 11 weeks before he got hurt, Musgrave was only the tight end 21 through that span, but that's a much bigger sample size than what I'm going to talk about for Kraft. But he did have over 72% of this team snaps from the jump, which is really important for a rookie tight end. He was trusted by LaFleur right away. But if we look at those 7 games following Musgrave's injury, Tucker Kraft, it seems like they almost trusted him a little bit more. Maybe it's more of an indictment on Josiah DeGuara and the rest of the guys that they had on this squad. Tucker Kraft was over 93% of the snaps in those final 7 games of the season. Tight end 7 over that span, 11th among all tight ends in targets, 11th in route runs. So I think he kind of made the most of that opportunity, right? And in those 7 weeks, of course, as well, with all tight ends who had 20 plus targets, he was 6th in yards per target and 3rd in yards after contact per attempt. So just some of the underlying efficiency, despite that low A dot, kind of leads me to believe that at the tight end position, if you can do it on your own, I think you have some of that insulated upside. Whereas if Musgrave isn't doing some of that stuff on his own, he really needs to be relying on that downfield stuff for some of his production. And I think that's a little bit less reliable than the lower A dot stuff. So that's kind of my stance there, but I still like both of them. I actually think they're both going to get some reasonable snaps this year. If we look at the Packers top 10 in drop back yards and yards per attempt from 2 tight end sets last season. And so they're going to use those 2 tight ends. Maybe that puts a dent in one of those wide receivers, but I think with what Kraft did down the stretch, they might not have a choice if they want to actually make sure that Musgrave gets some of those snaps as well. So good problems to have, just like you said, Joe.
Yeah, and you raise a lot of really great and interesting points. I do think that some of it may have had to do with the fact that when Kraft started seeing more work, it was also later in the season, and so rookies tend to take a while to get
Yeah,
up to speed.
good
So I
point.
want to see a full year of Musgrave, but
Yeah.
no argument for me. I think they're both good, and I think to your point, I think Kraft does do a little bit more after the catch. He's a little tougher to bring down, and he's that beefier tight end that's likes getting hit.
Yeah. Yeah. And regardless, like both of these guys, very nice complementary options to each other. So now it's just on LaFleur to get them both on the field at the same time. So get it done. Get it done, LaFleur. Okay, the wide receiver room, kind of like a little bit similar to Tennessee, but maybe a little bit more desirable from a dynasty perspective, just because the ages of these guys, Joe. We're looking at Christian Watson, first round wide receiver, Jaden Reed, I believe, second or third round wide receiver, I believe. My recall is shit from time
Second,
to time. Let's be honest here.
second round.
Second. Okay, thank you. Dontavian Wicks, I believe, was a fifth. And then Romeo Dobbs was in that day 2 neighborhood as well. He's just that workman-like thorn in the side for all these other guys to me. But what do you think of the Green Bay Packers wide receiver room? Who are you targeting? How would you approach these guys if you're looking to attack in Dynasty?
If I remember correctly, I think Dobbs was also a 5th round pick 2 years ago, or I
Right.
guess 3 years ago now as well. But so they've hit twice on day 3 with Wicks and Dobbs. I mean, this is definitely one of the hardest questions of the offseason. I think the answer is Jordan Love. Right?
Yeah.
He's got plenty of options, and it's nice to know that if somebody goes down, they've got plenty of pieces that they can move around.
Mhm.
I still think this is probably not a popular take because, and full disclosure, I have more Jaden Reed than I do Christian Watson. But when Watson played last year, granted the limited sample that we saw, he performed really well. He scored a bunch of touchdowns and they still treated him like an alpha. He's also the deep threat. So, from a physical profile standpoint, I still think he's kind of like the 1A of the group. I think Jaden Reed is the most interesting fantasy asset because of where he does his work, and in addition to the fact that he gets those carries, he gets the screen game. So I think he's going to get some more of the low hanging fruit, and he's really fun with the ball in his hands. Number 3 for me is Dontavian Wicks, who could very well be number 1 on this list if we're talking about this time next year. His yards per route run was something well over 2, if I'm not mistaken. And so it's just, it was very good performance from a rookie, particularly a 5th rounder. I mean, he proved he can play. And then you got Romeo Dobbs, who's just been Mr. Reliable for them over the last 2 years. He was a surprise 2 years ago. He continued to surprise and deliver last year. So I think I ranked them in that order. I would prefer it to be Reed number 1, and Wicks number 2, and Watson number 3, and then Dobbs. But I think the way it's actually going to play out, if Watson can find a way to stay healthy, is that he's probably the main target earner and the one who's going to be scoring the most fantasy points consistently. And the other guys I think Reed's going to find a way to get there with his versatility. And I think these other guys are sort of filling in. And there's obviously the injury upside that each of them carry if one of them goes down.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think I probably would have Reed as the number 1 guy. Watson wouldn't be far off, but I think what it is I've now given up on trying to rely on health for Christian Watson. And I'm kind of baking that into how I value him. You know what I mean?
Fair.
Just because it's probably going to happen at some point where he misses a few games. So I'm going to go with Jaden Reed because I think he's the guy who's probably going to be the most heavily targeted on this team. Just even if Christian Watson plays more games, I think Jaden Reed probably is more targeted, but Christian Watson, if he plays the full season, probably has that higher ceiling, right? Because he's going to get those deep shots. Funny enough, though, Jaden Reed did lead this team in deep targets last season with 21, but of course, Watson was hurt for quite a while. So we know that in a full season, Watson's going to usurp that number as well. But I just like
Yeah.
the security of the role.
Yeah, and make no mistake, the market completely agrees with you. I think
Yeah,
I'm kind of out on a limb here saying I
I
think
like
it's
it.
Watson. I think everybody has just sort of buried the guy, and he was hurt for most of his sophomore campaign, but his rookie year was fantastic. And if we see anything like that and he can stay healthy, I think it's a much more interesting conversation. And I think they should probably be closer together in ADP. I don't have their ADPs in front of me right now, but I know I can get Watson a lot later than I can get Reed. And I am not so sure that Reed's volume is as bankable as everybody thinks.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think if Watson wasn't getting hurt, I would have Watson over Jaden Reed. Like if I didn't bake that into his evaluation, but yeah, I think it's just an interesting room all around, right? Because if we look at the pie for these guys, Green Bay last year had the fourth most PPR points by the wide receiver position, and they had the most receiving touchdowns by wide receivers of any team in the NFL. So really big pie, but lots of dudes dipping their fingers in there, Joe. So very interesting room. And like I said, I would probably be attacking Jaden Reed. And then the other guys I kind of like in best ball a little more. I'm not sold on Wicks just because 5th round pick. You mentioned they hit on him. I'm not so sure they hit on him just yet, Joe. I know he had that big couple of games towards the end of the season, getting 3 touchdowns in his final 2 regular season games, but I think people might be getting a little bit too hyped on that personally. And maybe I'm just kind of trying to go with the safe bet as far as likelihoods on a 5th round pick. But I think if he does actually hit, it would be kind of fun because that's just another really good option here. Am I
What?
super wrong on Wicks? What do you think?
Well, I think it's just rookies who have well over 2 yards per route run in their rookie
Fair.
season tend to hit at a very high rate. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's
On it.
something like 70% plus. So the underlying metrics suggest that there's the best is yet to come from Wicks. It could go the other way. It always can, but the numbers tell us that he's a bet we should be making. I haven't pulled the trigger that much myself because I have the same questions, and it's this crowded wide receiver room. I like ambiguous backfields. I hate ambiguous wide
Yeah.
receiver rooms.
Bingo. 2.31 was Dontavian Wicks's rookie season
It's good.
yards per route run. That's stinky good for a
Yeah,
rookie. Jaden Reed was 2.23. Also
I know.
stinky good for a rookie. Also stinky good for a rookie. Okay, Joe, we're going to go to another team now. We're going to go to your capital of the country, not of your state of the country. My U.S. geography is a little rusty. You're probably surprised. And that would be the Washington Going Commandos, as I like to call them. They had an interesting offseason, brought in can't even fucking remember their head coach because I've been so focused on their offensive coordinator. Is it Dan Quinn?
Yes, and then Cliff Kingsbury. Yeah, I've been focused
Who
on
fucking
Kingsbury
cares?
too.
Who
Who
fucking
cares?
cares, right?
All we care
Jeez.
about is the offensive coordinator in this situation.
Yeah, 100%. And as we all know, we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. I hate this kind of hire for a team. When you hire a defensive coach and you hire the innovative offensive coordinator, you're setting yourself up for years of turnover at that offensive coordinator position. So they should have just given Cliff the fucking job at that point. But
Yeah, I've heard you make that point several times over the last few weeks, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think it's a really good point, and it goes under appreciated. So I think it's a real sharp point by you, but we persist.
We persist. We have to. I tell my kids sometimes, you get what you get and you don't get upset. And so that's what we're doing here with the Washington Commanders coaching staff. And we're still optimistic, right? We like the offenses that Cliff Kingsbury can put out there. And I think a lot of it starts at the top with Jaden Daniels, right? I've been waxing pretty hard on Jaden Daniels the last few weeks. I am pretty excited about this landing spot for him with Cliff Kingsbury for as long as Cliff Kingsbury is there. And then we see what happens. But what's your stance on Jaden Daniels as far as his dynasty ranking for you, or even just a ballpark if you don't have them pulled up? And then if you want to talk about that dynasty standing, just roll it into what you think he could do in year one.
Yeah. Last time I was on Unravelled, we talked about him. So I have the same concerns, which I'll touch on in just a moment. But with those weapons and his rushing upside, he can very easily crack the top 12, the top 10, maybe even the top 8. So that's not out of the question in year one. My biggest concern that we touched on last time I was here was that he's the injury risk because of the way he runs. I saw him get lit up so many times in college, and I don't think that that's going to fly in the pros, and I think it's going to lead to a shortened season, and hopefully, knock on wood, not a shortened career. But if he keeps running like that, he's not going to play enough games to help us. But I actually think that, we talked about Kingsbury already. I think people make fun of his offense. They call it the horizontal raid. I actually think that can be really helpful in that regard because, these quick hitters to Sinnott and to McCaffrey and, these short passes will prevent Daniels from, taking off as often. That's what I'm hoping. And so it seems like a good way to protect him. Then he can go big play hunting downfield with McLaurin and with Dotson. And so I'm really enthusiastic. And really, I think the best comp, we've got a great one, is that Kingsbury had another mobile quarterback not that long ago named Kyler Murray, who people were worried about his different concerns, but they were worried about his size being 5'11", really fast, very mobile. They were worried about him getting hurt, and Kyler made it through his rookie and sophomore seasons just fine under Kingsbury and put up really impressive numbers as well. So I love the fit. I love the coordinator. I love the talent around him that they've added. And I think sky's the limit. And, we could be talking about this guy as a top 5 Dynasty QB as soon as next offseason.
Mark my words, Joe. We will be. We will be.
Just stay healthy and we smash.
Absolutely. Stay healthy and we smash. That guy, he should get that on a fucking t-shirt or something like that. Yeah, you mentioned Kyler. I'm not going to go too hard on Jaden Daniels because I've been on that train all off season. But yeah, looking at what he did with Kyler, never worse than quarterback 11 in points per game was Kyler in Cliff's offenses, and that was in his rookie year. Each of the next 3, he was in the top 7. So I think there's some major upside here with this offense. I really hope that he can learn kind of some of that protecting himself. So I feel optimistic in that regard for him to be able to do that. But yeah, you never know. That's the biggest thorn in the side of being full steam for Jaden Daniels, even though I'm already full steam for Jaden Daniels. But yeah, I think what he can do for this offense, as well as being no slouch as a passer, can be very nice. And Joe, I'm going to move us into these wide receivers because you touched on a couple of the pass catchers there as well. So looking at the wideouts, in particularly Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson, but definitely bring Luke McCaffrey in there if you like, although I do have another question to ask you on that front. Are we undervaluing these guys with the addition of Jaden Daniels? Like, we're not seeing a lot of buzz around them. Terry McLaurin, people still love him. He's probably still in that 5th, 6th round for underdog drafts at this point. Maybe Dynasty, I'm not 100% on the Dynasty ADP. Jahan Dotson is miles cheaper, and he's a first round wide receiver, man. So are you diving in on the value, or what do you think?
I mean, I have been a Terry McLaurin buyer and holder since his rookie season. I think he is perpetually undervalued. And we're just waiting for the stars to align, man. We've been waiting for the right quarterback for him his whole career, and I hope we finally got it. I mean, last year we saw the stars align for our boy DJ Moore. He finally, and granted, he didn't have great quarterback play, but it was better than what he had ever had before, right? In Justin Fields. And we got that wide receiver 1 season out of him. So I'm hoping that's the case for McLaurin this year after he's had to deal with this, atrocious QB play. So I'm super bullish on McLaurin. I have tons of McLaurin, and I've been waiting for this year to come. With Jahan Dotson, I think he's a bounce back candidate, right? He had that promising rookie year with the unsustainable touchdown rate. Very disappointing sophomore campaign. I'm not overly optimistic, but there's reason for hope. But the reason I'm not overly optimistic on Jahan Dotson is because I think Luke McCaffrey's coming for his lunch.
Ooh,
Luke
tell me
McCaffrey.
about it.
Yeah, Luke McCaffrey is one of my biggest crushes in terms of these rookie wide receivers. He got that critically important day 2 draft capital with the last pick in the 3rd round. And he's got the opportunity. I think the door is open for him to supplant Jahan Dotson as the number 2 target earner on this team. Reports out of minicamp, just happening, today, are that he's lining up on the outside a lot more than they expected, which would be a really interesting development. He profiled as a slot. He's got the size, certainly. He's like 198 and 6'1". He can play outside as long as his technique is good. And the only reason that's in question is because he hasn't been playing wide receiver for all that long. But I think that leads us to a really interesting point on Luke McCaffrey that I don't see a lot of people talking about. I've talked about it with Jax and Coder and some other folks at the Undroppables, but it's not getting the attention it deserves, is that Luke actually had an early breakout if you factor in when he began playing wide receiver in his junior year. He was playing quarterback at Nebraska. They tried to get him to convert then. He did not. He transferred to Rice in his junior season, and that's when he started playing wide receiver. And his first year as a wide receiver at Rice, he had, he had 0.27 targets per route run. He had, 2.25 yards per route run. He had a dominator rating of 24% in his first year as a pass catcher and an A.dot over 11. By his second year as a wide receiver, his dominator rating jumped to 37.5 and his efficiency metrics all improved. So he is an early breakout, even though he's a later age. I'm wildly high on McCaffrey. I think I really want to improve on the 2 shares I have of him thus far in rookie drafts, and he's definitely one of my guys going into this season and beyond.
I like it. No, that was great, dude. That was great. I am wildly high on Luke McCaffrey. That's good. I haven't really known necessarily what to make of him. And honestly, you don't see a ton of people buzzing him up. You know what I mean? And so I love hearing your stance on that. And I love that you have a strong stance on Luke McCaffrey, because not a lot of people do. And so that definitely helps me a lot there. And I've been liking it as well. Just kind of not sure what to make of that room, right? Because those guys, Jahan Dotson, he does a little bit of inside outside stuff. Terry McLaurin is going to be playing on the outside. I'm looking at the startup ADP via Dynasty Data Lab. Terry McLaurin currently going as the wide receiver 37 in startups, 54 for Jahan Dotson, wide receiver 82 for Luke McCaffrey. So as a value proposition, McCaffrey might be the best one. 3rd round wide receiver. We didn't expect him to be a 3rd round wide receiver, and that is some capital, especially in this year's draft class if we consider it. So I like it. And at 82, I would definitely be taking a look. And if you look at rookie drafts, he's in like the mid to late 3rd round in a lot of situations. And to me, that's just cash money, Joe. So I like what you said there on those guys. I am diving headlong into Terry McLaurin this season as well, because I think another re-explosion, let's say, is coming from him. I wasn't necessarily ready to say that Luke McCaffrey was going to be taking Jahan Dotson's job per se, but I think I might have to go reassess. I was thinking there was going to be a decent little bounce back from Jahan Dotson with some of the team investment, but that investment wasn't made by this regime. So Luke McCaffrey's investment in the 3rd round was made by this regime. So as I start to ponder, I like what you're saying there, and I might be digging a little more into that Luke McCaffrey. And you can't ignore the pedigree either, man. And like, I know a lot of times this will burn you because a guy has a last name and you go in and he sucks. But I don't know, man. Maybe the McCaffreys are a little bit different. Ed McCaffrey, like my football fandom. Yeah, I think so too. My football fandom I was like 8, 9 when the Broncos were winning Super Bowls. So I was watching those teams. Loved Ed McCaffrey and Rod Smith. Huge fan of those wide receivers along with TD. So I grew up watching some Ed McCaffrey. He was one of my favorite wide receivers growing up. And I think maybe those guys are a little bit different. You mentioned one of the Undroppables heartthrobs before we move off of the Washington Commanders, or I guess we got to talk about the running backs as well, of course. But what's your expected role for Ben Sinnott in the first year? Zach Ertz is in front of him on the depth chart, but Zach Ertz is not much more than a pylon at this point. He's not going to be blocking a whole lot, and he's going to catch the ball and fall down, basically. So how long do you think it takes for Sinnott to carve out a role? Do you think it happens this year outside of an injury to Ertz, even though we probably get that injury? Like, what's your stance on Sinnott kind of taking over here?
Well, I think you just hit the nail on the head. Listen, I fully expect Zach Ertz to delay our Senate gratification. He completely lacks juice at this point in his career, but he's going to be exactly where he needs to be to help Washington's biggest investment, their rookie quarterback. And priority number one is making sure he succeeds. So having a veteran like Ertz on the field that's going to get to a spot where Reed can, get him the ball and get out of trouble, I think is going to be more important than Ben Sinnott's immediate progression and development. So as much as I hate to say it, Ertz relegated Trey McBride to the bench for damn near a season and a half. He's just as dusty. He was just as dusty then as he is now. I don't think he could get much dustier. So it doesn't have to be a bad thing for Dynasty, though. The way I'm looking at it is this. Now, I've gotten some shares of Sinnott, and I plan on getting more. So if Ertz is giving Sinnott the McBride treatment, that's going to be a buying opportunity for us.
Yes, it is.
And I will be targeting Sinnott in trades throughout the 2024 season because his upside is huge. He's got off the charts athleticism. He had a production profile in college that, looks kind of like, I don't want to say it, a tight end from Detroit. So
say it.
Say
his name.
You did not hear it here first. But I'm really excited about Sinnott's upside. I think it's going to take a little while, and I think that's going to be the buying opportunity that you need if you weren't able to land him in your rookie draft. So stay patient. We don't need Sinnott to be great day one. We need him to be great for the next 10 years. Go buy him in October if you don't have him yet. And if you have him, hold on for dear life. Do not give up.
Oh, yeah. Don't be selling him. He's been one of our favorites throughout the offseason process, and we're not going to throw that by the wayside now just because he might not get on the field till halfway through. So stick it out in Dynasty. Looking at the current rookie draft ADP, he is kind of right at the top of the third round, but I've seen him going as early as mid-second. I've seen him going as late third, right? And so there's a bit of a range there. So just make sure you capitalize because you're not getting them any later than like the end of the third round. So if you have to jump early third, that's fair value there, in my opinion. So don't want to spend too much time on the running backs just because I want to fly. We got another team here, Joe. We just crossed the hour mark, and we got a couple of rookie questions that we really want to get into here. But what's your expectations for the running backs in Washington? So we've seen some productive running back work happen out of Cliff Kingsbury offenses. Now they have Austin Eckler coming in to pair with Brian Robinson Jr., who was a nice little Cinderella story comeback last year. Who are you going to be adding to your teams most often out of these two guys? And what's their outlook?
Yeah, well, years ago, Matt Kelly, Podfather, coined the term the Alfred Morris corollary. And I can't help but think of it. He coined that term to describe what RG3 did for Alfred Morris's running efficiency, right? Because Alfred Morris was not a world beater, but with RG3 holding the defensive ends and holding the linebackers, all of a sudden there were these lanes for Alfred Morris to be a really efficient runner of the football. So ironically, here we are again, over a decade later, back in Washington. And I think the Alfred Morris corollary is in play once again. And I think that Brian Robinson is going to be the biggest beneficiary of said corollary from a rushing efficiency standpoint. Though I expect his receiving to regress this season. He had a lot of catches last year. Not only did they add Austin Eckler, but they also added a mobile QB, and we all know that mobile QBs tend to not check down to running backs all that often. So that's sort of why I think he's going to be the biggest beneficiary from a rushing standpoint, but he's probably going to take a step back from a receiving standpoint. And that's also why I'm not high on Austin Eckler, because he profiles as this great pass catching back. Well, if they've got a quarterback that's not going to be checking it down, I don't see what your out is for Eckler unless he's going to just turn into a grinder late in his career, which I suppose is possible. It's hard to know whether or not that high ankle sprain is to blame for his demise last year, or if it was the age cliff. But once running backs get to this age, I start to lean towards it was the age cliff. And if you're taking away the receiving upside, I don't see a reason to draft Austin Eckler, so I'm fading Eckler. I'm taking Robinson, and I might even dabble in, getting Chris Rodriguez as a throw in on, in some trade packages as well, because if Robinson goes down, then I think Chris Rodriguez could be, that battering ram benefiting from a mobile quarterback.
Yeah, I definitely have some dynasty shares of Chris Rodriguez, and I like everything you said there because, yeah, the hit that Austin Eckler takes versus the hit that Brian Robinson is going to take is going to be much closer to a death blow versus Brian Robinson. So that was really well put, because I think that added efficiency from the run game supplements the lack of targets. The lack of targets almost just tanks Austin Eckler, unless, like you said, he's getting like a buttload of carries, which he's not going to get. And even in Arizona, you look at Cliff's offenses last season, or the final season that he was in there in 2022, they were 13th in running back targets. 3 years prior to that, 22nd, 18th, and tied for 19th. So it's not like he's putting forth one of the higher running back target share pies for these guys to be divvying up. He's putting together a mid to low end one that we're not necessarily sure who it's going to go to. And then, like you said, that mobile quarterback, even though he had that one in Arizona with Kyler Murray, I think maybe some of that for the mobile quarterback comes down to their preference and their tendencies on the field, as opposed to what's being schemed up for them.
Or for maybe Kyler is who he could see.
The only guy that the offensive line was not covering, so he just went there. That was mean, Joe. That was fucking mean.
This is just physics, man.
Yeah. Science. Yeah, you don't fuck with science, so fair enough. Fair enough. Okay, so the last team we're going to unravel here, pretty probably the messiest one out of all of them. And I don't know, like, Joe, if we want to spend very little time on this one because it's a full avoid, maybe you're more optimistic than I, but we're talking the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns. Emphasis on Browns, because they're dropping a steaming pile of it this year, let me tell you. Or, I mean, their defense is going to make it so maybe they don't, Like, I think their defense probably does more harm to their organization than it's going to do good, because they're going to be picking in like the teens as opposed to at the top where they might be able to get a quarterback. So maybe they don't even think they need a quarterback. Like, what? I don't even know how to start this question with the Cleveland Browns. Like with the quarterback situation and the uncertainty around Deshaun Watson, like, looks like he's probably going to be coming in and getting that other crack. But how quickly are you adding Jameis Winston at the back of your Superflex rosters right now?
On the one team where I have Deshaun Watson, because I could not for the life of me find a trade partner in that league, I added Jameis Winston immediately. It was actually a very easy trade because I had Flacco, naturally, because I had Watson, and the guy I was trading with who had Jameis Winston was an Anthony Richardson owner. So it's just a nice little swap of our QB handcuffs. And so fortunately, I was able to get Winston, and I feel really good about that because I do not feel good at all about Deshaun Watson. His time in Cleveland has not been good. When he now granted, he was injured last year, and that shoulder injury was worse than what we were initially led to believe. So I guess we got to give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But Flacco came in, and the team looked rejuvenated. So with that being said, the vibes around Watson have been bad for a very long time. Some of that is, most of that is off-field stuff, but he hasn't done himself any favors on the field. So even with all that guaranteed money, and even after a success in Houston, I kind of think this is a make or break year for him too. I mean, if he fails to deliver again, I think Cleveland's going to start looking for ways to get out of that deal. And I definitely want Winston backing him up, particularly in Superflex leagues, so you're not left high and dry.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I think Winston's fantasy upside is always something that we might like in spot start situations. And Deshaun Watson's a guy that I'm like mega shying away from, just because, there's so many factors that could take him out of the lineup, not just poor play, not just injury, being an idiot, or, just, yeah, who knows?
Yeah,
so
Winston and Fitzmagic are like the creators of the YOLO ball. I want to see that. That would be fun.
Yeah, just Jameis Winston in a starting position is just good for football, in my opinion. And
amen.
We need that man in there. So, okay, that's good enough for the quarterback position, because not one of the most desirable ones. We're talking like back end quarterback 2 kind of range for these guys. at best. And Jameis, you're just happy if you get a couple of starts out of him. So the running back room, very interesting here. Nick Chubb, one of the best pure running backs that we've ever seen. They brought in Deonta Foreman because Nick Chubb is coming off a devastating knee injury. And I personally think he's probably going to be starting on the pup, probably missing at least the first 6, Joe, coming back a little bit later in the season. Deonta Foreman's in. They also still have Jerome Ford, who showed pretty nicely for them last season. They haven't brought back Kareem Hunt, and I don't know if they necessarily will with Foreman coming into the fold. But start with Chubb here from a dynasty perspective. Would you be selling him at this all-time low, or would you be waiting till he comes back, maybe has one of those Nick Chubb games, and then you look to start selling him, or would you just cut bait on him at this point?
I mean, I think it completely depends on your team. So I adopted an orphan this offseason, and it was in that draft that we just finished.
That's right.
And I had Nick Chubb, and the team needed a full blown rebuild. So I sold Nick Chubb for what I could get for him, and I did sell low because by the time the team I adopted is going to be good, it's going to be sadly probably towards the end of the line for Chubb. So I think we just have to pour one out for Nick Chubb. In my mind, he was the best pure running back of his generation.
Yeah.
And we got robbed of the last few years of his prime. So I don't know what to expect. I'm certainly rooting for him, but I don't own a lot right now. So I guess I can't say what I'd be looking to do. I tend to think that, I tend to sell running backs, even the really good ones, when they're around 26 years old, because, at 27 is when people start freaking out. So I'm sure I can get full value at 26. Then I rebuy veterans on the cheap. So I kind of think I'd be a buyer on Nick Chubb right now, depending on team context. If the price was right, I probably wouldn't sell now unless I had to. But I haven't really tested the market either way, aside from that one league that I mentioned where the obvious decision was to get rid of him based on where my team was.
Yeah, I think I think part of it's a little bit of a heartstrings one for me, right? Just because I've had a lot of Nick Chubb and he's done really well for me in fantasy.
Yeah.
And so for my heartstring factor, I probably wouldn't be selling him because I think he could have a couple of those pop-off weeks in where you could recoup some value. I think, the value, the kind of the market for him is where I'm kind of waffling, right? Because I don't think you're getting a second round rookie pick this year for him. And then if I'm selling him for a third, like if I look at the players in the third, okay, that might not be that bad, but just selling Nick Chubb for a third just kind of sucks. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Yeah,
It's just like the optics of it. And as I look, it's like, it might not even be that bad. I'm looking at the ADP right now. Your boy, Roman Wilson, Jalen Wright, Marshawn Lloyd, Ben Sinnott, Jermaine Burton. Like I'd probably take all those guys in Dynasty over Nick Chubb, but
I do think
fucking sold him for a third then, Joe.
Yeah, and I don't know. I do think there's something to that though, because anybody who's owned Nick Chubb for a prolonged period of time, like, has an emotional attachment to Nick Chubb. So I totally hear and relate to what you're saying. And I do think if anybody's going to come back from this thing, it's him. I just wish it didn't happen at this stage in his career. And I hope he's still playing when he's 35.
Yeah. And I will add that the third round of rookie drafts this year is basically a unicorn compared to most third rounds. So in most years, I probably wouldn't be taking that third, but this year now would have been kind of a decent time. If you're in a rebuild or something, take that third. Sure. Okay. The wide receivers, obviously Amari Cooper performed pretty well last year. But we know he is the fantasy locust and is bound to disappear from time to time. Elijah Moore was a big flop job there, even though we might have had a little optimism with him coming over from the Jets. Cedric Tillman's a rookie that was there last year, didn't get very much run. They drafted Jamari Thrash this year, I believe, in the 5th round. And they brought in one Jerry Jaggy from the Denver Broncos. Came over, they signed him to an absolutely inexcusable contract. And I don't know what to make. Like, I don't even know. Does he put enough a dent in? Like, I'll say I'm avoiding these guys, all of them. The only pass catcher here that I want is David Njoku. And I want tons of them. All of them. He's one of my favorites, has been for a long time. And he's a heartstrings play for me at this point now. I call him the Njokester because he's just such a jokester from time to time. But yeah, any of these wide receivers that you're looking at?
First of all, I'm stealing Jerry Jaggy. That's incredible. That's mine
Yeah, man.
now.
That came
Uh,
off of the Steve Smith Senior talk, calling him the Jag.
oh
And then I
my
just
God, I
decided
love it.
Jerry Jaggy made
I
so
love it.
much sense.
Yeah, I share your sentiment on Njoku. Let's start there. Someone we agree that we love. Njoku is one of my favorite tight ends because what do I always talk about and write about in terms of tight ends? It's just all about athleticism. You get the super athletic guys, and sure, it took him 3-4 years to break out, but when he broke out, it was fantastic. And last year, you kind of saw it become his team. I love Njoku, and like you, I literally dislike all the rest of them, and I have zero shares of any of these guys. I had high hopes for Tillman, but I think that ship has sailed after a, basically non-existent production profile in his rookie season, and now they drafted Jamari Thrash, and now they brought in Jerry Jaggy. I think we can blow that candle out for Tillman. But it seems like there's something wonky with all these receivers. Cooper, as you mentioned, he's madly inconsistent. Judy
Yeah.
has never put a strong season together, despite showing us little things here and there that we like, but just can never put it all together.
Yeah.
More flamed out in New York after a promising rookie year, then didn't bounce back when in a big way in his new setting. So I'm just so much more intrigued by so many other wide receivers. I don't like the QB situation here unless it's our boy JMO. So I don't know. I just don't see how any of these guys return value. I suppose Amari Cooper is the one, but I've noticed a funny thing about Amari Cooper, right? We always talk about how inconsistent he is from week to week, right? Some weeks he's really good, some weeks he's really bad, just disappears. I don't know if you've noticed this, but over the course of his entire career, that's what he does. He has a good year, then he has a bad year, then he has a good year, then he has a bad year. So when his ADP is high, you fade. When his ADP is low, you buy. So this is a fade here on Amari Cooper. To be clear, go back and look at his numbers, and if you don't believe me.
Yep, the Amari Cooper rule, or something like that. Yeah.
Every other
Very
Cooper.
Good. Yeah, that's good.
I just made that one up.
Yeah, nailed it. Absolutely nailed it, Joe. So I would say the Cleveland Browns can be signed, sealed, and delivered on that because it's Njoku or bust, basically. Maybe a little cheap feeler on Nick Chubb, but he could go either way, as we mentioned.
Have we ever blown out an entire team? Just
yeah. If Njoku wasn't there, we would be blowing that fucking candle out 100%. I would apologize to Jameson for it, but he can complain to all the rest of those motherfuckers on that team. You know what I mean? So yeah, they're very close. They're very close. If they tank this season and trade away Njoku at the deadline to a contender, yeah, we're taking a leaf blower to that bitch.
It's windy. It's windy in Cleveland, man.
Yeah, we don't even need to. Just let it. We'll just show them a little bit of mercy. They're gonna die at some point anyway. One more little segment that we got here, Joe. I know that we've talked a little bit of rookie draft stuff throughout the pod, and I know that we had a couple of things that we wanted to kind of talk about for that rookie draft check-in because rookie draft season is not quite over. So we would be remiss if we hung all of you rookie drafters out to dry already. So got some questions about some of these rookies. We're going to try and keep them a little quick, Joe, so we're not too long on this epi, but I think we can get a couple of good answers out here. So why don't you tell me, as of right now, your favorite rookie draft value?
Kamani Vidal. I have him as top 24, and he's consistently going in the mid to late third round. I've been grabbing him there every single time. I haven't had to take him in the second round yet. It's just been third round every time. I think he's worth a second round pick. As soon as Marshawn Lloyd or Jalen Wright or that last of the 5 top running backs go off the board, I think it's Vidal season.
Yeah. No, I like that too, actually. And I'm looking at that ADP, and he's 36th. Going in like the 36 range. So yeah, I think that's a smash. Another area where I'm liking Kamani Vidal right now is in those best ball drafts because him and J.K. Dobbins go fairly close to each other. And it's in between the 13th and the 16th round. And for a team where I didn't stack those running backs early, to add both of those guys onto a roster and basically secure that started, well, maybe not that starting running back because of Gus Edwards, but I'm calling it, you've got the explosive running back option on the Chargers at that point. And so I really like both of those guys. And I think Vidal's a really nice value there as well. My favorite value is Jalen McMillan. And we've talked a lot about him on the pod, but you're getting him like late third round, sometimes in the fourth. Like I saw him available in a third round, and I traded a second round pick for next season to come up and maybe accelerate my rebuild a little bit, if that makes sense. I'm on a team that I'm going young. I'm not sure what next year's class is going to be like, and I'm very high on McMillan to be the starting slot receiver for the Bucs next year, if not throughout this season. So I think McMillan in the late third is smashing.
All right, quick story, incredible segue. In our draft that we just had for Undisputed, you were drafting.
That was it, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was it. You were drafting right before me. I think it was 3.5 and I was 3.6. You moved into the spot right ahead of me, and I started panicking because you had already drafted Jaden Daniels, and I thought, oh God, Trav's coming in here to steal Luke McCaffrey from me. He's going for that Washington stack. He's going to take Luke. So when you took McMillan, I was just like breathing a sigh of relief and just immediately hit the draft button on Luke McCaffrey, who's the next guy on my list. If Vidal is gone, I'm snatching him up in the mid-third with a big smile on my face. I already talked about him. We don't need to say more. He's going to be the number 2 wide receiver in Washington sooner rather than later.
I like it. Yeah, I don't do as much stacking in the dynasty leagues because if it goes south, then you have 2 roster spots that went south as opposed to 1. I don't hate it in certain situations, but I don't know if Luke McCaffrey's is his upside is cemented enough for me to do that necessarily. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Very good though. What about your least favorite value in drafts right now?
Boy, it sucks that I have to go quick, but Keon Coleman. I have 0 shares. I think the scheme fit is absolutely befuddling. There is too much redundancy in Buffalo. Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman, all guys that are best suited for the slot. Somebody needs to line up outside. Somebody needs to be the X. If it's Coleman, I have concerns about the offense in general. I think it's probably out of necessity going to end up being Curtis Samuel because I don't think that Coleman has the separation skills necessary to line up out there. And I think they'll just be able to put one defender on him and then kind of cover the rest of the field. So they're going to have to put somebody with a little bit more speed outside. I think it's a bad fit. And I'm worried about the Buffalo offense in general as a result of their lack of addressing the wide receiver position after losing both Diggs and Gabriel Davis.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think like a lot of the indicators right now say that Keon Coleman's going to be getting some serious run on the outside too. So there is definitely a little bit of scariness to that with, like you said, that lack of separation. I think where he could maybe supplement a little bit of that is some of that red zone work as being that big body guy who can maybe do some of that jump ball stuff. Obviously, he doesn't have to just do that in the red zone, but likelihood is lower when he's doing that on a 40-yard pass downfield as opposed to a throw that's coming from Josh Allen from inside the 10 zone. So I think he would have to supplement with that.
I'm just worried about, I'm just worried about Josh Allen in general. I think that he's going to be pressing this season, and I think it could get ugly. And I just, I don't know. I'm thinking too much. They'll probably figure something out. I got to think they're smarter than I am, but I'm worried.
Never too much, man. Never too much. You can't unravel the situation unless you get deep into the thread, right? And that's what we like to do here. It's been a fun show, dude. It's been a really fun show. I'm so glad we did this. This is great.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, brother. We're not finished yet. I got a couple more for you.
Oh, okay.
Which
let's
rookie,
go. I'm ready.
Which rookie do you have the most of so far?
It's a tie. I've done 7 rookie drafts thus far. And I have 3 Malik Neighborses, yay for me. I've got 3 Roman Wilsons. I've got 3 Jermaine Burtons. And I've got 3 Kamani Vidals and 3 Theo Johnsons. So
your boy.
That is my boy. Athleticism, we were just talking about with Njoku, right? The most athletic tight end in combine history is Theo Johnson. I don't care how long it takes. I'm holding.
Was that your fat as hell waiver bid on him after the draft too? I can't remember exactly what.
No, that wasn't
You
me.
did?
I thought I was going to get him at 21 and he went for like 120. I was like, geez,
Yeah,
I
that
thought I
was
liked him the
bananas.
most.
That was bananas. Yeah, some of those prices, like I was like, wow, I didn't have a chance at getting these guys, but
Yeah.
interesting to go into the season with that little fab, but that's okay. For me, I don't even necessarily know the numbers, to be honest. I didn't crunch who I have the most of, but I do have a bunch of Ben Sinnott, a bunch of Jalen Wright. Stoked about that. I think I have at least 3 Jalen Wright shares that came second round, mid-second round too. Maybe 1/3 round earlier in the process, which is delightful. And then yeah, I mean, just kind of those guys. Maybe a little bit of Troy Franklin. Jalen McMillan obviously is one of them. I've been scooping him up every chance that I can get. And then some a little bit more on the high end, right? I got a few Marvs, got a couple of Jaden Daniels is. So
Daniel I.
Jaden Daniel. Oh man. Very good. Very good. Who are you not touching in rookie drafts right now, Joe?
I mean,
Aside from Keon Coleman.
I already said Keon Coleman. The other one is Adonai Mitchell. I mean, I was low on him throughout the process. I was worried he was going to get overdrafted. He ended up going in the second round, which probably saved a lot of fantasy managers from drafting him in the first of their rookie drafts. But I still see him going in the second round of rookie drafts, which I still think is too high. He's on a run first team with a running quarterback. He's got really good target competition in Michael Pittman and Josh Downs. He never had impressive yard per route run numbers. He never had any impressive efficiency metrics. He profiled as a 3rd round wide receiver, but he put some really nasty, dirty stuff on tape in flashes. And that's what NFL teams saw. And that's why they're so excited. And I think he's much better in real life for the Colts than he will be in fantasy. It's an easy fade for me, not touching him.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good call, right? Like you would have to see him put a pretty big dent in the workload of Michael Pittman Jr. After the contract Michael Pittman Jr. just got in the seasons that he's recently been having. I have a really hard time seeing that happening for Adonai Mitchell. So I think that's a really great take there, Joe. And I think the last question, I'm just going to give you the floor for, because I know you got a couple of guys locked and loaded here. I know a couple of them are guys that I would mention in this question. So who are a couple of real life undrafted free agents that you're liking to take stabs at on the post rookie draft waiver wire to add to maybe a taxi squad, Joe?
Sure. For the listeners, I just want to be clear. If you're picking up any UDFAs, you want to prioritize running backs.
Yes.
It is very rare that an undrafted wide receiver is going to become anything. On that note, I've got 2. So Jalen Coker played at Holy Cross, lesser competition, had a decent enough combine. This is a hedge against Xavier Legette. If you've got Xavier Legette, you should probably just pick up Jalen Coker and throw him on your taxi squad, because if Legette fails, they still need an X. Coker showed that he can do that. He's a more sophisticated route runner than Legette is. Legette has all these other athleticism traits that they're going to like, but I think Coker is an interesting one. The other one is Tyler Harrell. He ended up on the Jets. There's not a ton of wide receiver competition on the Jets either. He's got 4.3 wheels. Played for Alabama, transferred to Miami. Apparently there are character concerns, and he's a little bit of a head case. If you got room on your taxi squad for a 4.3 guy in a not crowded wide receiver room, I think he's worth a shot. Most importantly, though, it's the running backs. This is kind of where we want to focus our UDFA energy. So number one, I already touched on, is Dylan Johnson. Before he played at Washington, he was at Mississippi State. And there in that offense, he caught a lot of footballs. In Washington, they used him as a true ball carrier. And so people only really remember the latter and think he's this 2-down grinder. But no, he's actually got really underrated receiving ability. And so I think that situation in Tennessee is probably going to be a platoon, regardless of whether or not Tajay and Pollard stay healthy or get injured. I think if one of them go down, the other one's not going to get 100% of the workload. I think Dylan Johnson is going to be worked in. He's got a comparable skill set. He's not as explosive as those guys, but he can catch, he can run, he's reliable, he's a leader. Second, Blake Watson. This one hurts. Speaking of Tony Pollard, by the way.
Bad.
Huh?
It hurts so bad.
I know. So speaking of Tony Pollard, Watson transferred to Memphis. He was a converted wide receiver. He put up awesome numbers in his last year. He ran a 4.3940 at his pro day at his size, which is 189 pounds. That's good for a 101 speed score. That's an important threshold for me. Go back and read my work if you care about why.
Please do.
But his burst score also was the best in the class. 138.5. That was better than any running back that was invited to the combine. It's kind of silly that Watson wasn't invited to the combine. So, anyways, of course, he ended up in Denver. So it's a crowded RB room to say the least. But I think Sean Payton sees value in backs like these. He loves throwing the football more than any other coach in the league. Something's got to give. I think P. Ryan's probably gone. I don't know what the future holds for Javonte Williams in that backfield. And in Denver, he's on the last year of his contract. So you've got Jaleel McLaughlin, you've got Audric Estime, and you've got Blake Watson. I think he's a really interesting prospect. Great guy to stash on your taxi squad. Last one is Luis Reese Zammit. I'm not even sure because the guy didn't play college football. He's a rugby player, Welsh rugby player, phenom, won a championship at a young age. He's 23 years old. He entered the NFL through this sort of foreign athlete program. They had a pro day for these guys. He ran in the 4.4s, and apparently he was upset because he had clocked himself in the 4.2s and 4.3s previously. This could be nothing. He obviously needs to develop into a football player. But for an RB that runs in the 4.4s or better on the Kansas City offense, I have room on my taxi squad. It's worth a flyer. So there you go. Those are my UDFAs that I'm targeting.
I love it, man. And on that Reese Zammit one, like if there's any position that you're going to come in and just be able to kind of learn with minimal development, it's probably going to be running back, see hole, hit hole, run. Right.
It's not like rugby players are all that different, right? I mean, I think he already has a lot of these skills innately. He just needs to learn how to use those shoulder pads.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. Very good. And I love Blake Watson, Joe. I love some Blake Watson. Been on him for a little bit. And yeah, some of his metrics are some of the best of the running backs in this entire class. It's just that he played lower level competition from a running back factory that is the Memphis Tigers, though, going all the way back to D'Angelo Williams back in the day, if you recall.
Sure do.
Good stuff, Joe. Thanks for waxing there on some of those UDFAs. I definitely wanted to give you a little bit of the floor there, have the listeners get a little bit of a glimpse in to the Dino, Joe. I think this was a really good episode, man. Like I said, you're a super sharp dude. I have seen a glimpse behind the curtain into some of the process, and I know that you're putting in the work. So really love what you're doing. Everybody who is listening to this right now needs to go over to the undroppables.com and check out Joe's work. The Processing the Process series was awesome. And it really, it's a nice way to contextualize some of the things that we should be looking for. And it's not illegible for the average fantasy player. You know what I mean? I think you find a really good balance with going deep into the weeds, but still keeping it consumable for the people who might not be quite as degenerate and psychotic as we are, Joe. And so I really like that about your writing style and the way that you kind of approach the game. And then we've had many good conversations, many decent trade talks over the past week or so, and many more to come, my friend. So thanks for joining, dude. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for all those kind words, man. It means a lot to me. It's always a pleasure. Anytime, I'm happy to fill in. And as I may not be as much of a freak in the spreadsheets, but I am absolutely rookie obsessed and will tell you more than what you want to know.
Yep.
So thanks so much for having me. This was a blast, and hope all the Unravelled listeners got something out of it. Go dominate what's left of your rookie drafts, and NFL schedule comes out tomorrow, so the best ball strategy is just getting started.
Oh, just getting started. All the week 17 bros. Oh, that's going to be fun.
That's good. You're ready for huge shifts in ADP starting tomorrow.
Yep. I love it. And on that note, go sign up at Underdog Fantasy with code Undroppables to get up to $250 matched on your first deposit. Drop $250, get $250. Do the math. That's $500 to play with on these best ball drafts. And they've got like $3, $5, $10 buy-in tourneys going out there from time to time. So definitely a lot of fun to be had. Of course, you can get up into some of those higher stakes ones, which are definitely nerve-wracking, but support us as well, go to the undroppables.com. The UN score is available for purchase. Our Patreon is bumping, so please go and check that out. And then make sure you subscribe to that YouTube channel. That's where you're going to find every episode of this show, lots of our short video comment. I kind of switched up my flow a little bit, and I'm not doing as many like clip segments of the show. I'm trying to do some more kind of shorts and reels to make it nice and digestible for the people. So if you like what we're doing over there, give it a like. And if you would like to see something else from us, shoot a comment down on that video, because we really want to see what you want. We want to make this valuable for you, the listener. We have a lot of fun doing it. If we can add that, keep adding that value for you, then that's just a win-win all around. So thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thanks to everybody for subscribing. Thanks to Dino Joe for joining me tonight in Wiz's absence while he's in jolly old England. So for Joe, I am Trav with the Undroppables. This is Unraveled. Thank you again for tuning in. We will see you next week. Peace.